Headlines this hour. Police have confirmed that 17 people have been gunned down in Gobozana village at Lusikisiki in the Eastern Cape. The South African Weather Service predicts a temperature drop across various regions from tomorrow until Tuesday, with more snowfall expected in large parts of KwaZulu-Natal. And the Western Cape High Court has granted the DA an urgent interdict to stop Mkhonto Wesizwe parliamentary leader Dr. John Hlophe from serving on the Judicial Service Commission. Good afternoon and welcome to Week in Review. We are with you from our studio here in Johannesburg. Now, during the next 2 hours, we will review some of the biggest stories of the week. I'm Gustav Freiling and you can participate. You share your comments or ask your own questions by giving us a call. Our number here in the studio is 011 714 0680, 0681 or 0682. Right, we start with this tragic story. 17 people have been gunned down in the Ngobozana area at Lusikisiki in the Eastern Cape. The incident happened around midnight, with 13 members from one family and 4 from another family killed. The 18th person is in a critical condition. Our SABC News reporter Nomzwanele Ngoma is on this story and joins us live from the scene now. Good afternoon. What is the latest that you can tell us from there today?
Greetings to you and to the viewers at home. At the moment, we still have the same information that you've just said, where 17 people were gunned down, 13 from one family and another 4 from another family. The incident happened where there was a number of people in one of the households because they were preparing to go to another family that was going to perform a ceremony whereby a mourning ceremony that was what's going to be performed, because we hear that where they were going, the mother of that household, which is born from one of the families that these 17 people were murdered, was in mourning for 2 of her children that died. So this incident just happened while they were preparing for that ceremony. But we do have one of the people that was there last night who had everything when it happened, who joins us now. Mama, masikamukele ku-SABC. Ngicela usichazele into ba uve ntoni, kwenzeke ntoni, isenza kanjani?
Bekusebusuku ekuseni kusa nje ngabo 2 besilele sizolungiselela basivuke sibheke emumbulweni eMantlaneni. Seva ke kukhala qoqo emnyango, then seva ke izabhamu zidubula, sazimela ke thina abakwazi ukusifumana thina sabanga abasindileyo ke. Kodwa ke abanye babe kwezinye izindlu, nathi besikwenye ihouse, sisinde sabathathu nosana olwesine oluna 1 month olukwazileyo usinda.
Inenza izivinjani mama into yeziziganeko zimana ukwenzeka, ingakumbi yenzeke nikhona nani nidenisini?
Itrauma enkulu, kunzima, asikamkeli nangoku. Kusebuhlungu, kusenzima, asikaphili ngaphakathi emphefumulweni yethu. Kusenzima kakhulu, kusenzima, asikayamkeli.
Ingaba bakhona abantu mhlawumbe umuntu omdala kwabantu basolekileyo uyawayazi uba ebemngakanani nomncinci kwaba baye basoleka uba umhlawumbe ebemngakanani?
Omdala inomba olapha ku plus minus 70 years. Omncinane inoba olapha ku 14-15 years, oyena mncinane bonke kwaba basolekileyo.
Okay, that is one of the people who was in one of the houses where the incident happened, just telling us that they were part of, they were in that household, but they managed to hide. So that is how they were not part of the incident. They didn't die. But there's also a General Phumzile Tetyana here, who wasn't able to speak to us, saying that more information has been addressed by Commissioner Fani Masemola, but we will take it. We'll go inside and just to see if they do allow us to go in, just to see, because we hear that the bodies are still inside, forensic is still busy, they just got here. It's back to you in studio.
We have to stay with you for a while. I just want to ask you, you've been there for a while now, and obviously that crime scene is active, it is ongoing, the investigation there is ongoing. Just to recap, you have no further information as to what could have led to this?
There's no motive at the moment. The police haven't given us any more information besides what we have at the moment. But we did hear that there is a search that is currently underway, or that will be underway very soon. Other than that, there's no more information that we have.
How rife are mass killings in this province and in that area where you are? Is this something that happens there?
It's very common, because not so long ago we were here, we're covering a story of another household that was chased away because they were accused of performing witchcraft. They burned down their homes. Last year in September, 2 people died. Not so long ago, even this year, it's very common. These crimes are very common here. But we were hoping that we'll also hear from the police about the prevention measures that they do have in this area, because killing of people in this area is very common.
And if you could explain this to us, the relations between the victims, whether they are from the same family, and whether multiple generations are basically being wiped out there. Can you paint that picture for us?
These people, these victims, were in that household because they were there to prepare for a ceremony that was going to be performed in another village. So as per Xhosa tradition, when there is going to be ukhululo lwezila, which is the end of the mourning season, when a family was mourning a deceased person, when they conclude that season, there is a ceremony that is performed. So these victims were part of the people. They are not relatives, but they were part of the people who were there, who was going to leave in the morning, which is this morning, who were going to leave and go to another village, which is Emantlaneni, to perform the ceremony. That is how they were involved in all of this.
Okay, thank you so much for your insight and for telling us what is happening there on that active crime scene where you are. That's our SABC News reporter, Nomzwanele Ngoma, joining us live this afternoon from Lusikisiki, that area in the Eastern Cape. We continue with this story now. The South African Weather Service has forecast a drop in temperatures in many parts of the country from tomorrow until Tuesday. It is also forecast a 60% chance of rain and the possibility of snow in KwaZulu-Natal. Now, last week, hundreds of road users were trapped in snow on the N3 at Van Reenens Pass between KwaZulu-Natal and the Free State. One person died of hypothermia after being trapped in the snow for 2 days. Now, meanwhile, the KwaZulu-Natal Cooperative Governance Department has given the assurance that it is ready to deal with any dangerous situation that might arise from extreme weather conditions. MK Parliamentary Leader Dr. John Hlophe has been interdicted from serving on the Judicial Service Commission for now. The Western Cape High Court has granted an urgent interdict in favour of the DA to stop the designation of Hlophe to serve on the JSC. The High Court made the ruling in a virtual sitting.
The DA launched the urgent interdict application about 3 weeks ago. The party argued that Parliament had not taken a rational decision in designating Hlophe after he was impeached from the bench on charges of gross misconduct. The DA says it welcomes the judgment as it strengthens the fight to maintain the highest standards.
It's a precedented case, the first of its nature, right? And we think it's a step in the right direction, not only for where we're heading as a political party and as a country, but also for South Africans who deserve the best representatives across all arms of state and all tables of decision making as far as their lives are concerned.
In its ruling, the court found that the National Assembly rubber-stamped Hlophe's designation and it failed to exercise its constitutional discretion. The court also found that the National Assembly committed a material error of law and its decision was unreasonable and irrational. Parliament has consistently maintained that it will abide by the court's decision. The DA has dismissed Hlophe's legal argument that his impeachment should not have collateral damage.
We are not targeting Hlophe. What we are targeting is an upholding of the rule of law. What we're targeting is the upholding of democratic principles. And what we're targeting is cushioning South Africans.
The DA's interim interdict is subject to a review application that is yet to be heard. The review application includes applications by Corruption Watch and Freedom Under Law. MK spokesperson Nhlamulo Mandela could not be immediately reached for comment as his phone went unanswered. Ulelani Philip, SABC News, Parliament.
Welcome back. Right, Basic Education Department Minister Sifiwe Gwagube lamented the state of the school system earlier this week, declaring it to be in disarray. According to her, the sector is facing extreme strain because of years of drastic budget cuts, economic stagnation and fiscal mismanagement. Now, the Western Cape has already cut back on teaching positions for 2025, which might result in bigger class sizes and less one-on-one contact with learners. In KwaZulu-Natal, there is a severe unemployment problem that has left at least 40,000 entry-level 1 teachers jobless. Let's have a look at what the Minister of Basic Education had to say.
It's no secret that in the recent weeks, several provincial departments of education have been vocal regarding the budget pressures that they are currently facing. And these pressures are not just a recent occurrence, but they have been years in the making due to aggressive budget cuts, economic stagnation, fiscal management across government, mismanagement across government, which is now affecting our frontline services. These budget pressures are not just numbers on spreadsheets, but they translate to fewer teachers, reduced textbooks, fewer admin support staff, which means that teachers spend more time on admin work, thereby reducing learning and teaching time. In essence, the very fabric of our children's future is now under threat if we continue in this current trajectory. In provinces like the Western Cape, we've already seen the decision to reduce the basket of teaching purse for 2025, a move that may result in fewer educators in classrooms. This may mean larger class sizes, reduced individual attention for learners, and ultimately a risk to the achievement of quality education outcomes. Unfortunately, the other provinces throughout the country are also in similar positions, with many desperately trying to find ways to avoid having to top slice their budgets for key services like textbooks provisions, like admin support or scholar transport programs. The Deputy Minister and I have been in constant engagement with the provinces to support them during this challenging time. We have committed ourselves to doing everything we can to stabilize the system and have appealed to provinces to retain the basket of purse that they currently have in order for us to not affect the frontline services or compromise the education outcomes that we desperately want to improve.
The Minister of Basic Education there now joining us live to discuss this further is Matshidiso Lenkwaso, is a budget analyst at Section 27 as well as the chairperson of the Budget Justice Coalition to unpack what this could potentially mean for not just teachers but also the quality of education in the country. Good afternoon and thank you so much for being with us today.
Afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about this very important aspect.
And you heard what the Minister said there right now. What does the future hold? Is it that bleak?
So unfortunately, what the minister has painted is quite a dire situation, and without further intervention, especially from a resourcing perspective and mobilizing resources for basic education, we are concerned that this can only get worse. Since '94, South Africa has made significant gains in education attainment, especially in marginalized communities. However, with recent budget cuts, we're concerned that it might regress some of those gains that have been made, and we may continue to see overcrowded classrooms, especially in marginalized schools, as well as learners who struggle to get to school through scholar transport issues or lack of support regarding that. So we are definitely concerned and see this as an opportunity for government to really come together to mobilize resources and to really allocate funding in a way that actually advances basic education attainment for all learners in this country.
So Minister Gwagube has projected that 7 provinces will not be able to afford their budgets. So in the 2027-28 year, then what does this mean?
Sure. I mean, this is really concerning because what she's reflecting is that there have been budget constraints in several provinces or most provinces in the country. I mean, we concur with this because the work that we have been doing is that we've noticed the exact same thing. The departments have been crying for help for many years because of this aggressive fiscal consolidation path that our National Treasury, our government has undertaken. And so when we hear this, I mean, of course, on the surface, it is very concerning, but it is good to know that and that there's attention that's put on this issue now before we get to 2026, 2027, and we have those issues. So we see this as an opportunity to urgently reshape our budget so that we are allocating sufficient resources towards human rights allocation, particularly basic education, but also towards healthcare, towards all the other social sectors.
What could this mean for the country's education system in the long term, basically? All these staffing issues, then, will it get worse?
Yeah, so if we continue on this path, it will definitely get worse because what we'll be seeing is that, I mean, we're already disinvesting in education. So our allocations, even when we do have increased allocations, they're still below inflation. And so that means that's being eroded. The value of our investments in education was eroded by inflation. But then also in the past, we had budget cuts, even just this time last year, towards key programs in basic education, including infrastructure. And so what this means is that there are promises and intentions that the minister has made towards redressing or reforming our education system. But that's unlikely to happen if there aren't the resources available to fulfill those promises. They'll just be left as promises. And this is a problem because we're seeing the effects now. But education is one of those sectors that will really truly see this when the class of grade 1s next year when they go to matric, and we'll really see what the decisions that we made, especially in our resource allocation towards education, what that really meant.
Okay, so you alluded to that. What about the future of the children? South Africa is a very youthful country, and are their futures safe, basically?
That's what we are concerned about, and that's why it's just been so important to rally together, not just, for government, but also for society to come together and to start thinking about how do we fund education and how do we invest in it. Because if we go down this path, what we see is that learners will, and especially in marginalized and underserved communities, you'll find learners who will be in overcrowded classrooms, which means that they don't get the same attention. And this also advances inequality of education in the country. And this is happening even in what we consider to be wealthier provinces like the Western Cape and Gauteng, who are more resource rich and get more attention than, say, for instance, a Northwest or a Limpopo or Eastern Cape, KwaZulu-Natal, who are all facing their issues. I think that it is crucial that we recognize that in this weak economic climate, when we make decisions like austere budgeting, it is the learner in South Africa who has to disproportionately face the burden of making the choice of either they're in the Western Cape, where they will be characterized by overcrowded classrooms, especially in the more impoverished communities in those areas, or they'll be maybe in Gauteng, where they're committed to maintaining their teacher posts, but then they're alluding to budget cuts towards scholar transport or towards textbooks. And really, it is the learners who are affected by this.
So the DA has called for a comprehensive spending review, which will look at all of government's spending patterns. Then what are you hoping for the outcomes there? Because the money must come from somewhere. They'll have to cut somewhere else to put it into education then.
Sure. So there are immediate interventions that can be made, and then, of course, the long term, right? So from an immediate perspective, we do agree and support the review of the spending so that it can reflect our upcoming budget, and the budgets in future can actually reflect a society that values education. So we want to see, for the longest time, South Africa spent more on education than any other sector. We need to bring that back. We now spend more money servicing our debt. at the expense of education, at the expense of healthcare, at the expense of social protection measures. So we're hoping to see education, healthcare, social spending areas getting a large part of the budget so that we can protect the most marginalized people. And then, of course, a good question that you ask is, so where does this money come from? The Budget Justice Coalition, we are a coalition of civil society organizations, and we've noticed this trend of disinvestment and, of course, government saying, well, we have no choice but to cut the budget. But actually, we've proposed alternative fiscal framework and alternative ways to raise revenue. I mean, we've made examples about rethinking the pension fund of government. Like there is about 50 billion that could be invested to purchase bonds at a concession or at rates that are favorable, and that could mobilize resources. We talk about human rights impact assessments, that even if there are budget cuts that are being made, that we consider what impact this has on the most marginalized learners first. We look at, already some of our interventions have been taken up by government. So our suggestion of using the gold foreign exchange, the Jafekra, to mobilize more resources. And we're looking forward to the medium-term budget speech reflecting that those resources are going towards key areas like education, healthcare, rather than perhaps like servicing our debt.
So you basically need them to be more innovative. Are they actually listening to you then?
So this new government, maybe a new administration might be an opportunity to listen to that. So for the longest time, I think one of our criticisms is that while South Africa has great transparency in terms of our budget information, our public participation leaves more to be desired. So we would like to see a budget that's actually shaped by the people in this country. We'd like to see, we're seeing already the Department of Basic Education, Healthcare engaging with communities, but we would love to see National Treasury and provincial Treasury departments actually shaping the budget according to their engagements with the community. So we really are calling on human rights-centered budgeting.
So let's mention, you mentioned this earlier yourself, those who will bear the brunt, the impoverished schools, the marginalized communities. What can be done immediately to bridge that gap there?
Sure. So, what we have noticed is that the departments, the national departments, but also provincial departments are meeting with Treasury to think about, the decisions that have to be made. Unfortunately, we're 1 month away from the medium-term budget speech, but we're hoping that in that short term that the various departments and the social sector departments will be better able to present a case towards an investment case towards basic education, towards healthcare. Those are immediate interventions, but of course, in the long term, we really need to rethink our fiscal framework and start moving away from austerity budgeting and more towards fiscal expansion and growing our economy. This also means that it's not just National Treasury who's leading economic policy, but there are other departments like Department of Trade and Industry. We want to industrialize so that we can generate more resources, so that we can advance the rights, resource the rights to education and healthcare. We're also looking at even our monetary policy. Really, we're asking all of government to come together and wield our economic policy to advance human rights.
So, of course, a big part of the education system in South Africa is devolved to the provinces, health and education. Does that cause discrepancies between provinces, a lot of it?
Yes, so this is some of the provinces have been complaining about that. I know provinces like the Western Cape and Gauteng will say that they have a lot of learners because there's inward migration from other provinces. And so we have made suggestions or recommendations about thinking about how we allocate resources to the provinces. We might need to, in this fiscally constrained environment, we might need to rethink our provincial equitable share formula, among others, to make sure that it actually reflects the needs of those in the provinces, and that if there are budget cuts or any decisions that are made, it's not the most marginalized and the most constrained provinces that feel that burden.
Okay, thank you so much for joining us here on this Saturday afternoon. That was Machadiso Lenkwas, who is a budget analyst at Section 27, as well as the chairperson of the Budget Justice Coalition, talking to us about the budget cuts in the Department of Education. This is Week in Review on the SABC News Channel. We'll see you right after this. Welcome back. Now, the Reserve Bank has imposed a fine on Old Mutual Life Assurance Company. The central bank says this is a result of the company's non-compliance with the provisions of the Financial Intelligence Centre Act following an inspection conducted in 2020. Now, the Prudential Authority, a division of the Reserve Bank mandated to supervise and enforce compliance, says the administrative sanctions imposed on Old Mutual Life Assurance Company consists of 4 cautions and a financial penalty totaling 15.9 million rand. Now, of this, 5.9 million rand is conditionally suspended for a period of 3 years from the 23rd of July. The Prudential Authority imposed a caution not to repeat the conduct which led to the non-compliance. The Reserve Bank says the company cooperated throughout the process and has undertaken the necessary remedial action to address all the identified compliance deficits. Tourism operators in the Northern Cape hope to capitalise on South Africa's Astro-tourism strategy. Tourism Minister Patricia de Lille and Science, Technology and Innovation Minister Dr. Bladen Zimbande jointly launched the programme at Carnarvon in the Northern Cape as part of World Tourism Day. The Astro-tourism strategy aims to take advantage of towns like Carnarvon with a small population and low pollution to draw tourists.
6 Astro guides have so far been trained to show tourists the night skies and narrate the stories of their forefathers' astronomy beliefs.
Astro guide is someone that takes a tourist on a night tour where we tell people indigenous stories about the stars and link them together with the stories that the Bushman people told. So we take you on a tour. We have different packages where we take people on donkey cart rides through the town, telling them about the history.
With a square kilometre array being built in the area, it's hailed as the perfect mix of science and tourism. The authorities want small towns, usually overlooked by international tourists, to benefit.
We must draw more people, more tourists that's coming to our country, to what I call these hidden gems. I mean, here you can play golf in a desert. It's not the normal golf experience. And, you know, to also get the young people to get involved. And so there's great potential for Astro-tourism in this area.
The towns identified will see infrastructure development happening soon. These include roads and tourism facilities.
Others will come here, they may have some money to be able to actually invest here. So it's very important. But also, as you say, we don't want this thing to be an island in a poor community. That's the reason why we are doing a lot to actually support the local community. We've adopted a school here, we've put a laboratory in it, and other facilities. We've got scholarships. Of course, first choice is those students who are in the science, technology and mathematics disciplines. We give them full bursaries to actually go and study. But we also support others who may not who want to do education and other programs, so that also they don't feel left behind.
South Africa will compete against Chile and Australia in terms of Astro-tourism offerings. Ulrich Hendricks, SABC News, Carnarvon, Northern Cape.
Welcome back. Now, today we delve deeper into a report released earlier this week on what has been termed sexual corruption. A leading expert in public procurement, anti-corruption and development law, Professor Sope Williams from Stellenbosch University's Faculty of Law, has penned a report that uncovered a disturbing trend, the pervasive problem of sexual corruption in South Africa. Professor Williams, dedicated to a career promoting transparency and accountability in governance, first started delving into the issue of sexual corruption when she was approached by the Open Contracting Partnership, a United States-based NGO, to examine gender-responsive procurement in South Africa. Now, her findings revealed that women-owned businesses often face unique challenges in accessing public contracts, including being asked for sexual acts in exchange for securing government tenders. Now, she joins us this afternoon with Lisa Vetten, a research associate of Southern Centre for Inequality Studies at the University of the Witwatersrand. Good afternoon, and thank you both for joining us here today.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So, Professor Williams, let's start with you in broad strokes. What are the salient findings of your study?
Thank you. So the findings in the study mainly were that women-owned businesses face a lot of barriers in trying to access government contracts, corruption being one of those barriers. But in relation to women-owned businesses, they were also asked for sex as the means of a bribe in order to access government contracts or in order to be awarded government contracts. So that was the biggest finding, that women who try to navigate the procurement system in South Africa face all the barriers that small businesses face, all the barriers that women face, discrimination against women, but then also face an additional hurdle of being asked to perform sexual acts in exchange for government contracts.
So you say, although your study involved a small sample, actually, that almost every woman business owner you spoke to had a story about sexual corruption, and you were really surprised to learn this. Why is that?
Yeah, so that was really surprising, because the women who own businesses and women who can navigate procurement are usually highly educated. They're usually experts in their field, highly competent. They're usually middle-class women, so they're wealthier, educated, urban, suburban women. And I didn't expect that women at that level will be facing the same kind of challenges that women who are poorer, women who are more vulnerable also face. So I think it was shocking, because I think I had assumed that, when you get to a certain level in terms of your wealth, that your wealth and your privilege will insulate you from some of these problems. But that was not the case, because these women who owned businesses, led businesses, were still facing a problem that, seems to be just a problem that women face, irrespective of whether they're rich or poor, educated or not.
Ms. Vetten, let me ask you, what are your impressions about the study and your thoughts on how widespread this practice is across all echelons of society for women in South Africa?
Yes, I do think the problem extends well beyond procurement, and it's one that is very, very old. I think there have been very ugly stereotypes attached to the idea, women who sleep their way to the top, or women who are gold diggers. Those ugly stereotypes, I think, have concealed this kind of behavior. One finds it in the workplace, where it's typically termed quid pro quo harassment, where there's the expectation that you must trade sexual favors for promotion or for a job. And you see it in an academic environment as well, where we often call it, say, sex for marks, for example. So it is a problem in many different kinds of sectors that needs much more attention. And I think because it occurs in different sectors like academia, like workplace, like when you are self-employed, it does require slight tweaks of our legislative framework in order to accommodate all those different facets of the experience.
Okay, but would you say it is because the fundamental problem with government is at the moment a lack of institutional capacity or the will to deal with this situation?
I think there's a range of different problems up here. I mean, if it occurs in the workplace, for example, you can typically deal with it through the Code of Good Practice around harassment, where it's dealt with as quid pro quo harassment. We have no idea what's going on in the private sector. The private sector is very untransparent, especially in comparison to government, which is tell something about what it is doing. You can see some of these cases actually ending up in the rape courts. And I've seen some quite interesting judgments where the courts have come down in favor of the complainant. So I think there's a mixture of different kinds of problems. Universities, for example, have yet to, I think, take a strong stance on the problem in terms of outright prohibiting or regulating relationships between staff and students, which would make a big difference. So I think there's different attitudes of commitment and will across the different sectors where this occurs. It's not just in relation to government's action or inaction.
Professor Williams, you mapped out the legal framework against sexual corruption in South Africa, looking at the extent to which sexual corruption is criminalized. Why are those legal frameworks not working?
Right. So the problem in the legal frameworks is that sexual corruption is criminalized only for certain classes of people in certain contexts. So, for instance, if you are under 16, then it's criminalized under the Sexual Offences Act. If you are a learner in a school, then it's criminalized under the Employment of Educators Act. Now, but in other contexts, you just don't have coverage. Of course, if you're an employee and it happens in the employment context, then as Lisa said, yes, under the Code of Good Practice for harassment in the workplace, then you're covered under that. But outside of those contexts, there's no, there are no remedies available for women who are victims. And in terms of looking at it as a corruption offense, The problem with that, even though it is a corruption offense, especially when it happens in the public sector, the problem with the anti-corruption legislation is that it criminalizes both the giver and the receiver of the bribe. So if there's a sexual corruption request and a woman acquiesces to that, she can't report it because she's also a criminal under our anti-corruption legislation, under the Prevention and Combating of Corrupt Practices Act. So the anti-corruption legislation, first of all, is patchy, doesn't cover everyone, and in terms of it being a pure corruption offense, it doesn't work for this kind of gendered crime because the woman who gives the bribe, in this case, gives the sex, in this case, is also criminalized, which just obviously means that we're not going to get reporting on it. We're not going to get people complaining about it. So that's the problem with our legal framework in relation to sexual corruption.
Okay, Ms. Vetan, let's talk about some new laws. In May, President Cyril Ramaphosa signed the National Council on Gender-Based Violence and Femicide Bill, as well as the National Prosecuting Authority Amendment Bill into law. Has that, or will it in the future, change this scourge that we're talking about?
No, but I think we need to look at the legislation carefully and see what the legislation is actually intended to do. In relation to the National Council, what it's doing is it's establishing a board that will be responsible for coordination, for monitoring, and for developing plans and strategies. That's what it is. It has no powers to prosecute or initiate prosecution or even call and hold government departments to account. What it can do is make recommendations. So that might be where one could use it to do different kinds of things. So I would suggest, Professor Williams has outlined the problems in corruption legislation. I think one should go back to the Sexual Offences Act and look at the definition of rape, which is quite clear in distinguishing between what we call consent and submission, and recognizes coercion, and does recognize the fact that just because you sometimes say yes to something doesn't mean you are truly and genuinely consenting in the meaningful sense of the word. Sometimes you're submitting because that coerced sex is the least worst of two options. And so the definition of rape does have this recognition of what it calls coercive circumstances and the abuse of power and authority. So we have seen rape cases in the kinds of contexts that Professor Williams has outlined being successfully prosecuted as rape because the courts have recognized that something it is not linked to your employment contract at all to be able to use your power and suggest that somebody must swap or exchange something in order for you to get some kind of gain. So that might be, the kind of thing that we would want to look at is this better? Does this better than corruption legislation or under sexual offences legislation? Do we need a hybrid of the two? And those might be some of the debates you could have at the council level.
Professor Williams, on Women's Day, President Ramaphosa said that 7% of women that are 18 and older had experienced physical or sexual violence in a 12-month period. Does the frequency of the occurrences and the percentage track with your study and even with your small sample?
Yes, indeed. In fact, I would probably even venture to say the figures are probably much higher. But of course, we know that sexual violence and sexual crimes are severely underreported, right? Because the criminal justice system, is not really kind to women victims, and we still have problems with women being re-victimized and re-traumatized, and inquiries into the character of the woman and her dressing and all that. And so the focus is always on the victim and not really on the perpetrator. So yes, I would probably say that the figures are higher, but it does track with my research. And I think something that probably we have to think about is the fact that sexual corruption falls on the sexual violence continuum. It essentially is a marriage of gender-based violence and corruption. And South Africa has a problem with both. We have a problem with gender-based violence, with sexual violence against women and girls, and we have a problem with corruption. So when you bring those two together, you see sexual corruption. But the problem is that sexual corruption is not properly considered from either the GBV policy space or from the anti-corruption policy space. So it's kind of falling through the cracks, if you like, in terms of dealing with it.
Okay, Professor Williams, here's something interesting. You emphasize the importance of using this term, sexual corruption, rather than sextortion, which has been used interchangeably. Why do you make this distinction?
Right, I make the distinction for two reasons. First, I want us to concentrate on the fact that sexual corruption is a corruption offense, and to distinguish it from sexual harassment, and also to distinguish it from sextortion, which is also used to refer to cyber blackmail and extortion of intimate images. And so a lot of countries think of sextortion as just that, people blackmailing you for intimate images, releasing people's nude photographs, etc., etc. So if we use the term sextortion to also refer to sexual corruption, then there's going to be confusion, because some people will think of, are you talking about intimate images? Are you talking about cyber blackmail? What are you talking about? And I want the focus to be on the corruption element of it, because when you say sexual corruption, I think it immediately tells you what we're dealing with. It is, sex as a form of corruption, right? But sextortion doesn't do that, and people struggle with what does that mean? Is it extorting sex? Is it is it cyber blackmail? What are you really referring to? So I want the focus to be on the corruption element, and I want us to be clear and to separate it from other forms of sexual crimes and sexual violence.
Ms. Vetten, is the picture being painted here of women basically being coerced into trading sex to survive and to basically feed their loved ones? Is it a cycle, a catch-22 situation?
Well, I think we have to see this occurring across the spectrum. So yes, I think when you are in very deprived circumstances, the urgency and the pressure and the vulnerability is probably greater. But I think you can also see that this happens in relation to women who are better off and who we don't initially think that this happens to. But the point is, they too are dependent economically on these kinds of contracts or their work or whatever it may be. So I think it does occur across the spectrum, but sometimes I think the pressures and the structural constraints are greater for some women than they might be for others. But I think regardless of one's class position, this should not be happening. And we should be taking the kinds of steps that do not allow someone to abuse their entrusted power in this way in order to offer jobs and other necessities of life, actually.
Ms. Vetten, let's quickly talk about the criminal justice system. Do the police, in instances where their intervention is being sought, know how to do their job, including prosecutors having enough resources to do their work?
Look, I think the entire criminal justice system is under serious strain at the moment. The austerity measures introduced by Treasury have, I think, resulted in the underemployment of people and in many ways the dilapidation of the infrastructure that is necessary. So that is a problem. I think there are problems around training that are also being affected by the under-budgeting and the lack of resources. So I think we have both a set of problems where you have crimes that people don't deal with very well, they turn victims away, blame them, being compounded by the lack of resources, which means the time takes longer, people aren't trained as well. So we've made some progress, I think, on paper in terms of legislation interventions, policy interventions, but in the day-to-day practice, we are still lacking a great deal. And I sometimes worry that we hide behind all the signing into law of all the legislation that's been introduced, and that allows sometimes the system to get away with what is very inadequate implementation.
Professor Williams, talk to us about the solution then to your findings and the problems that you have identified.
Right, thanks. So I think for sexual corruption, I think for me a priority would be a legislative amendment that recognizes sexual corruption as an independent offense and an offense that does not criminalize the victim. So a number of countries have already done that. So Tanzania has in their own corruption law an offense of sexual bribery. And so in Tanzania, if you abuse your position and request sex as a bribe, then you as the perpetrator alone are guilty of that offense. So they don't criminalize the victims. Brazil has done that, Croatia, and a few other countries, not many, but a few. So I think that's the first thing. And then the second thing we need to think about is that, of course, this will be now, how do we address this and enforce this law? Of course, our corruption laws are severely are not well implemented or adequately implemented, and that's why we have this much corruption, especially in our procurement space. So I think one of the things that will be important is to have better reporting mechanisms. So for instance, women who are trying to navigate procurement or sanitation services or health services, and a sexual bribe is requested from them, will have a safe place that where they can report and where action will be taken, so that we can begin to get a sense of, obviously what the scale of the problem is, the sectors where it's prevalent, and have some kind of enforcement of the law. So the law changing, and then better reporting facilities, and obviously better support for victims. And that's just being done now, but by NGOs and not by public institutions.
Okay, Ms. Vetten, Professor Williams basically saying sexual corruption is seldom recognized as a distinct phenomenon within either the anti-corruption framework or the frameworks addressing gender-based violence now. How do you believe this can best be addressed?
I would take a slightly different position and say, purely because I've worked on some of these cases, that the criminal law does have the scope to address this and is addressing this. I think what is needed is possibly a collation of the kind of case law that does exist where this has happened. I was looking this morning, for example, at a 2008 case in the Supreme Court of Appeal. So I think a collation of the case law that provides guidance around how these cases are to be prosecuted and to be thought about, that could be important. And I do think there's a need for a broader investigation. I mean, perhaps because I work in an academic space, I think there's also a need to look at this when you have lecturers who try to persuade students that sex with them is going to improve their prospects. So I think what we would need is possibly a slightly broader examination that looks at this whole question of abusing power and your entrusted power and your authority in a range of different contexts, which I think would fit with the kind of studies the broader range of studies that Professor Williams was talking about, in using, I think, to be able to craft something that can draw on what is existing law rather than waiting for law reform processes, which can be incredibly time consuming, to see what we can do with that already and to start moving and utilizing those frameworks, drawing on what we have learned from the cases that have been successfully prosecuted.
Professor Williams, would you like to respond to that?
Yeah, sure. No, I think I agree with Lisa. I think the only thing is that for a lot of these cases, they've been dealt with in terms of civil remedies. So they've been dealt with as a breach of, your employment contract. They've been dealt with as sexual harassment. And so a lot of those cases end up in the labor courts, which is fine, but they don't have the criminal sanction attached to them. And so people, maybe lecturers, like you talked about, there are a number of cases in universities where lecturers were requesting sexual bribes from students in order to pass courses. So those lecturers may lose their jobs, but they don't have a criminal sanction attached to them. There's no criminal penalty. So they can't go on and do it again. And one of the problems with a lack of enforcement is that it creates impunity. And it means that we see more of that rather than less when you don't have a criminal label attached to it or criminal sanctions attached to it. So it is being dealt with under existing frameworks, but I think the lack of the criminalizing it is a gap.
Okay, thank you so much for this fascinating conversation this afternoon, Professor Sope Williams from Stellenbosch University's Faculty of Law, and Lisa Vetten, the Research Associate of the Southern Centre for Inequality Studies at the University of the Witwatersrand. Now, moving on to this story, news from abroad. Israeli warplanes have launched fresh attacks on buildings in southern Beirut, where the military says Hezbollah is storing weapons. The Lebanese authorities have so far confirmed 6 deaths with more than 90 others wounded. Reports are also coming through that a leader of Hezbollah was targeted.
It was by far the most powerful attack carried out by Israel in the city during nearly a year of conflict with Hezbollah. UN spokesperson Stefan Dujarric emphasized the global body's concern over the attack during a press briefing.
We are watching the developments unfold in Beirut with great alarm.
An Israeli source was cited in the news outlet Axios as saying Hezbollah leader Sayed Hassan Nasrallah was the target of the strike. A source close to Hezbollah told Reuters that Nasrallah was alive, while Iran's Tasnim news agency also reported he was safe. Iran-backed Hezbollah's Al-Manar television reported that 4 buildings were destroyed and there were many casualties in the multiple strikes. Rescue crews could be seen on site here pulling 2 children who are alive from the rubble. The Israeli military said it had carried out a, quote, precise strike on Hezbollah's headquarters. Israel has struck Beirut's southern suburbs 4 times over the last week, killing at least 3 senior Hezbollah military commanders and more than 700 people in the country. In a televised statement, Israeli military spokesperson Daniel Hagari said the Central Command Center was embedded deep within civilian areas.
I didn't intend to come here this year.
The strikes hit Beirut shortly after Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu vowed to continue Israel's attacks on Iranian-backed fighters in Lebanon in a closely watched United Nations speech, as hopes faded for a ceasefire that could head off an all-out regional war.
The United States was not involved in this operation, and we had no advanced warning.
Pentagon spokesperson Sabrina Singh told reporters Friday that while the U.S. was not told in advance about the Beirut strike, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin did speak with his Israeli counterpart as the operation was ongoing. Singh declined to say what Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant told Austin about the operation and whether it indeed targeted Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah. The Pentagon also declined to speculate on whether the Hezbollah leader was still alive.
Right, you're with Week in Review here on the SABC News Channel. Stay with us. The news will continue at the top of the hour. Headlines this hour. Former Tshwane Mayor Silje Brink is optimistic that there's room for his reinstatement as the DA in Gauteng says it intends to ask its leaders in the Government of National Unity to intervene. Israeli warplanes have launched fresh attacks on buildings in southern Beirut, targeting a Hezbollah leader. And Arab foreign ministers have warned that escalatory actions in the Middle East could raise the possibility of a regional war. Welcome back. This is Week in Review, already in progress here from our Johannesburg studio. I'm Gustav Freiling. Good afternoon. And remember that you can join our discussions. Give us a call on our studio number. It's 011 714 0680. 0681 or 0682. Right, former Eskom contractor Michael Lomas will remain in custody until his next court date for a bail application on the 28th of October. Lomas, who is accused of 1.5 billion rand Eskom fraud, was extradited back to South Africa from the UK last week and made a brief appearance at the Kempton Park Magistrates Court. Lomas's attorney has requested time to go through the multitude of evidence that will be shared with them by the state.
Michael Lomas will remain in custody until 28 October 2024. This was decided by the magistrate at the Palm Ridge Court. Lomas's legal team has requested the postponement, saying they still need to meet with the state to share contents of the case.
Court postpones your matter until the 28th of October, back to this court 8:30, for the disclosure of the case content to be provided to your legal team.
Lomas's health remains a concern and will require, among other medications given to him in prison and over-the-counter additional medicine.
I think his health will always be a concern, but I do believe that he's being properly looked after by the medical staff and Department of Correctional Services.
Lomas will remain behind bars in an undisclosed correctional services facilities until his next court date. Nothando Magutulela, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Arab foreign ministers have warned that escalatory actions in the Middle East could raise the possibility of a regional war. Jordan's chief diplomat has meanwhile pledged on behalf of the Arab world that they could guarantee Israel's security in the context of it ending its occupation of Palestinian territories.
There was clear tension in the atmosphere as the Security Council met for the umpteenth time, as Arab foreign ministers led by the Palestinian Prime Minister again echoed warnings heard time and again.
Without solving the Palestinian problem and end the suffering of our people that started with the Nakba in 1948, the region of the Middle East will continue to be struggling unstable, insecure. I think we are proven right that it's time for the State of Palestine to be established and on the ground and as fast as possible to end the misery, the insecurity and the troubles of the Middle East. We are believers in peace and prosperity for all. We thank all countries that recognize Palestine. We also invite others to do the same.
Over 500 people were killed in one day.
It was Jordan's foreign minister who warned that the situation could get much more dangerous in a region already on the brink, particularly if the Israeli government was allowed to continue its escalatory measures against Palestinians, not only in Gaza, but also in the West Bank.
You have a deadlock in Gaza because the Israeli Prime Minister aborted the exchange deal. You have an escalation in Lebanon because he sees he only understands that the language of war. He hasn't listened to the international community. He didn't listen to his allies. So he launched war in Lebanon. And now this government is trying to escalate on the West Bank. If that happens, that is when the threat of regional war will become the more real, because the symbolism and the importance of the holy sites is across the Arab and Muslim world and will reverberate across.
He further argued that the Security Council needed to perform its duty of maintaining international peace and security, failing which, the consequences could result in the entire region falling into the abyss, where the future of even Israel would be compromised.
I can tell you here, very unequivocally, all of us are willing to, right now, guarantee the security of Israel in the context of Israel ending the occupation and allowing for the emergence of a Palestinian state, independent state. He is creating that danger because he simply does not want the two-state solution. And if he does not want the two-state solution, can you ask the Israeli officials, what is their end game? Other than just wars and wars and wars. I'm telling you, all of us in the Arab world here, we want a peace in which Israel lives in peace and security, accepted, normalized with all Arab countries in the context of ending the occupation, withdrawing from Arab territory, allowing for the emergence of an independent, sovereign Palestinian state on June 4, 1967, lines with occupied Jerusalem as capital.
Regional powerhouse Saudi Arabia called for ceasefires in both Gaza and Lebanon, echoing calls that have not delivered anticipated agreements due to the belligerence of the warring parties, both accusing the other of intransigence.
Our position is clear, and as I just stated, what we believe very, very, very strongly in, first of all, that a ceasefire is necessary, that the guns are not going to solve anything, that we need to move towards a peace in our region, and that peace is firmly rooted in addressing the Palestinian issue. We have been saying, for months now, that this is an incredibly dangerous moment and that the risk of the situation spiraling out of control is real, and that is not less the case now, it is indeed more the case. And that is why we continue to push for a ceasefire certainly in Gaza, but also now a ceasefire in Lebanon, because again, guns are not the answer.
As anxiety grips the region and international efforts struggle to break the military mindset that has resulted in so much deadlock, destruction and death. Sherman Riceby's SABC News, New York.
Right, 17 people have been gunned down in the Ngobozana area at Lusikisiki in the Eastern Cape. The incident happened around midnight with 13 members from one family and 4 from another family killed. The 18th person is in a critical condition. Now, our SABC News reporter, Nomzwanele Ngoma, is still on the scene there and she joins us live this afternoon. We spoke to you about an hour ago. Can you please tell us what is the latest there where you are on the scene right now?
At the moment, the bodies that were there are being removed by forensic, and we do also have the commissioner to tell us more about more information that has developed so far. If you can just look right behind me, you can see the vehicles. People are busy. The bodies are being put inside of those forensic vans. But to tell us more about this incident, we do have the OR Tambo District Commissioner, Phumzile Cetyana. Welcome to the SABC.
Welcome, Sosas, to you and your viewers.
General, what information are you getting on the ground?
We have just discovered that the 17 people that have been callously killed here are members of the same family, and they were gathered here waiting for the taxis that are going to pick them up this morning to go to another locality where they were going to have a family ritual.
General, these incidents are common in Lusikisiki, but we also heard that there was a drop because they were topping the crime statistics, this Lusikisiki. What does it mean? Do you have prevention measures that are in place? How are you fighting crime in this area?
Thank you very much. We have deployed a number of police officers in this area to deal with the crime situation in this area. And I can tell you, I would say we're on the right track, we're winning, because the crime levels in this area are coming down. This incident is just one of those incidents. It's a very separate incident that is shocking, and I see the communities in this area are reeling with shock. We are also shocked as the police because an incident of this nature is very rare.
General, there is also an issue that has been raised by some people, the issue of intelligence department, because they are saying one of the sections that are failing to bring information forward to prevent these incidents is the intelligence department. What is your comment on that?
Yes, we do have intelligence people around the area, but at this stage I cannot say they are failing because we do have information that we normally follow, and some of the successes emanate from their work. I cannot say they are not working, but yes, the work is too much. Maybe we need to intensify on them, but to say they are not doing anything, I cannot say that, because we do have successes that emanate from their effort.
Yes. Investigations are underway, I believe. Investigation is underway, and we are hopeful that we will make a breakthrough. Thank you. That was the District General Phumzile just telling us that they are investigating this matter, they are hands-on on it. But to tell us more, just to hear from the community, because they did hear gunshots when this thing was happening, let's just welcome one of the community members. Mama, masikwamkele ku SABC. Uventoni uziva njani ngayo yonke lento yenzekileyo?
Ndiva kulusongo kakhulu mntana, kungaqhubi umnandi. Kwasegazini lama kukuhlanga. Andirayithanga kwaye le nto yenzeka apha akusandirayithanga.
Ingakungenzeka ntoni mama?
Andazi uba singenza kanjani mntanam, ngoba ukuba uThixo asincede le nto yenzekileyo, ukuthi uThixo asincede ingaphinde yenzeke, zange ndayibona.
Inkosi ke mama. Let's just welcome another resident that wanted to say something about this incident. Buti, nilulucha niyazibona eziziganeko ziyenzeka kule ndawo. Inenza nizive njani nina loo nto, especially ngokukhuseleka kwabantu balapha emphakathini?
Sisi wam, ngokokubona kwam kwixesha langoku bona abantu bafaya isikakhulu ngaba balingana nathi. And xa uqwalasela i-justice system yase-South Africa iwiki kakhulu. Into ebendicinga urhulumente aqwalasele i-constitution, because ivumela nabantu abenzi bobi uba babe namalungelo. Uyomangalela umntu yambona uyaphuma, elo xesha ilungu lomndeni wenu alisekho, nimbone ehamba apha esitratweni. Ndicela urhulumente ke bake baqwalasele i-constitution le.
Jabulani. That was the views of the community members that are concerned about the incidents that keep on happening in this area. It's back to you in studio.
Thank you so much for joining us live from Lusikisiki this afternoon. Our SABC News reporter, Mandela Ngoma, speaking there to the community members and to the police in that area where this crime occurred. You're watching Weekend Review on the SABC News channel. We'll see you right after this. Welcome back. Now, the 22nd Nelson Mandela Lecture will be delivered by Nobel Literature Laureate Abdul Razak Gurnat at the Wits University in Johannesburg Later this afternoon, Gurna won the 2021 Nobel Literature Prize for his work and firm position on the effects of colonialism. He's also passionate about the plight of refugees. Our SABC News reporter Kailihle Kumalo is on the story, and he joins us now live from the Wits University this afternoon. Good afternoon, Kaya.
Well, certainly a very good afternoon to Gustav. So it's going to be a very important time once again for the Nelson Mandela Foundation. As you know, that every time, annually they have all these prominent guests to explore all the very critical social issues facing humanity and the world at large. So today it's about the shared humanity, and it comes at a very critical time where the world is battling with a myriad of issues, whether you're looking at the conflicts, the issues around peace, but also the human rights as well, really just taking a center stage. And they couldn't have found a very better person to deliver this lecture than Professor Guna. As you look at his profile, it's really quite well established in so many aspects around fighting colonialism and really just speaking out against the atrocities. But also, as you recall last year, Gustav, we saw the activist from Pakistan, Malala Yousafzai, really delivering the very same lecture, where she highlighted a number of issues around women oppression, especially in countries like, of course, Afghanistan, with the presence of Taliban, where the women are still really subjected to all kinds of oppression and repressive measures, but really highlighting the issue of the global apartheid and saying this should be included in that particular aspect, especially pertaining to the women's rights. So it's going to be a very interesting afternoon. So it's all going to start around 3 p.m. we understand. That's when the lecture will be delivered. So it's always quite a very interesting time, really looking at all these pertinent issues facing the globe.
Kailihle, thank you so much for joining us here this afternoon from the Wits University. I'm sure you're looking forward to that lecture, and he will report on it for us later this evening on SABC News. Now, continuing with this, the DA in Gauteng says it will nominate Silje Brink as mayoral candidate despite his political defeat. Provincial DA leaders joined their Tshwane Metro colleagues at a media briefing in Pretoria yesterday to respond to the removal of Brink.
Action SA is no longer a party that will enable cooperation. It's an enabler of chaos. So there was a time when they were part of the solution, constitutionalists, pro-growth, but now they're the useful idiots of those who want to destroy the Constitution, who are opposed to the GNU. That's what Herman Mashaba has made them. So I would find it very, very difficult to ever trust anything those people say again.
After a day of suffering political defeat, Brink is spitting fire at Action SA. He wants to be reinstated as Tshwane mayor.
I can't preempt the outcome of a democratic process, but what we've said is I will be the mayoral candidate. We'll field our candidacy and we'll fight to win.
His hope to be reinstated is backed by the DA in Gauteng, who plan to field him as mayoral candidate. They also want their leaders in the GNU to intervene.
We cannot continue to have a situation where we on our end are showing good faith. We on our end say we are going to do something and we do it. We said we're going to support in KZN. We did. And it cannot be that we are doing that. On the other end, we are being met with hostility. We are being met with dishonesty. And this is the conversation that we have asked that our leader have with the national leadership of the ANC. We are actually going to be fielding Silje Brink again as the mayoral candidate when these nominations open up again.
The ANC, with its majority seats in the Tshwane Council, is leading talks for a new power-sharing deal.
This is not a grand coalition engagement. This is a partnership. This is what ANC calls the GNU, where we are bringing all parties. It's not a DA and an ANC coalition. And that's where our problems have been with the Democratic Alliance in the province.
Yesterday, Herman Mashaba goes and make a pronouncement to then say there's an agreement with the ANC in terms of Nasipi Moyo being their candidate, and that has been agreed on. And the ANC later on saying, no, that is Herman's wish, that is not their agreement, which then says that there is no deal on the table.
It now remains to be seen whether the national, provincial and regional leaders from the various political parties can put their differences aside and prioritize the stability of the Tshwane municipality for the sake of all residents in the capital city. Meanwhile, the DA in Tshwane says if it all fails, they will gear up for a fight for Tshwane from the opposition benches. Patricia Fasache, SABC News in Pretoria.
Right, now to analyse the political theatre in the Tshwane Metro this past week, we are joined by the political analyst, Dr. Levi Ndoh. Dr. Ndoh, good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us here on Week in Review.
Gustav, good afternoon to you. Good afternoon to the viewers at home. Thank you for having me.
So the city of Tshwane now has 2 weeks to elect another mayor. What do you make of the names that are being thrown around, such as the former Tshwane ANC chair, Kgosi Mahepa?
Well, as the regional leader of the ANC, he could be the possible candidate to occupy that position. We need to acknowledge the fact that the city of Tshwane has been run through a coalition. And in the existence of coalitions in our metros, we're going to see constant changes in political leadership. Maybe with the city of Tshwane, we could be learning that politicians could have realized that sticking onto coalitions might not be a solution, and they could be possibly moving towards having a government of local unity. But anything is still possible. There could be a lot of discussions, and I can confirm that they are taking place, and we could not be surprised if anybody that we'd never thought of could therefore become the leader or the mayor in the city of Tshwane.
So following the collapse of the DA's coalition there with Action SA in Tshwane, what coalition formation do you see forming following Brink's removal now? And what are the possibilities, basically? How strong are those alliances on the current opposition benches?
At this stage, we do not have something that appears to be a concrete or a solid coalition arrangement. And what could be happening is that the different political parties could be moving around, trying to convince each other in order to come up with a solid government. What I perceive to be the wish of the Democratic Alliance is that national leaders of both the ANC and the Democratic Alliance should come together and come up with something that's similar to the government of national unity. But I think it's important to note that in the current arrangement, the government of the national unity concept appears to have worked at national level and to a certain extent at provincial level. There has not been an introduction of such at local level. And at local level, now that they have to complete the era of the sixth administration, maybe the city of Tshwane could provide a better case study on how they can maneuver and come up with something that will be referred to as the government of local unity. Indeed, it will require a lot of negotiations and a buy-in from other smaller parties.
Let's talk about Action SA for a moment. They say that they have research, its own research, that shows that only 36% of the respondents felt that the city had been moving in the right direction over the past 18 months, with 54% believing the city had gotten worse and a further 10% indicating that no improvement had been experienced. What do you make at the end of the day of Action SA's reasons on why it supported this ANC motion of no confidence to remove Sylvia Brink?
Political parties will constantly conduct their own research in order for them to position themselves in a manner where they are able to make a much bigger impact. Of course, you are going to get mixed feelings on how ordinary people respond to the service delivery initiatives by the city of Tshwane. Of course, there are those that say we have not seen anything happening ever since the DA came in, and equally, there are those who are quite excited about the developments in the city of Tshwane. What we need to seriously consider is that motions of no confidence in these coalitions are not based on service delivery output. They are based on what politicians at a given time want to see happening. And that is also the case with what has actually happened with the city of Tshwane. So whether it's service delivery, whether it's poor governance, a motion of no confidence can still be proposed irrespective of whether the government is performing better or not.
Okay, so if you say it's not about the service delivery, what do you make then of the politicians? The ANC leadership in Gauteng and what seems like a divide between them and the national leadership where there is a unity government with the DA.
This also could be a good area in which we draw lessons from. That maybe it is time that leaders at national level give those that are at a lower level the responsibility to take decisions on what is actually happening, where they are actually based, and where they are given responsibilities. And if such space is given, it could give these local leaders sufficient space and time to study their own environment, identify the right people in their own areas, whether it's from their party or other political parties, because these are the people who know and understand themselves very, very well. And the constant participation by national leaders on local matters, and especially on governance, creates an impression that the elites at upper level appears not to be having sufficient trust on leaders at local level. And that talks much to the caliber of people that are deployed at local level by different political parties.
Well, you heard the DA provincial leader there, Solly Msibanga, saying that they're going to ask their national leader, John Steenhuisen, to speak to the president to see if they can sort out the situation at local level. Even if he does that, do you think something will happen?
At the time they were negotiating for the formation of the provincial government in Gauteng, the leaders of the Democratic Alliance at a provincial level had to seek assistance from Helen Zille to come and intervene. And that, in my view, talks to the incapacity or the inability to deal with local issues by those that are deployed at that level. But now that we have got a concept of the government of national unity, which appears to be embraced by many, even though we know there are those who don't like it, maybe that could be a better approach to adopt, because if it's working, maybe it can solve the challenges of the constant change of government, ingovernability at local level, so that our politicians can easily focus on service delivery issues.
Let me just ask you quickly about the next local government election, 2026. What do you think will happen there with Action SA? Do you think voters will punish them for what has happened this week?
Voters in South Africa wait for the period of the elections, and therefore they decide on who to vote for based on what that political party appears to be bringing on the table. But Action SA, in my view, has actually decided to become a major role player in the politics of Gauteng, specifically in the metros. They started with their move in the city of Johannesburg. It succeeded. They made a clear announcement, and a bold one, to say that they are going to ensure that the mayor of the city of Tshwane is removed. And indeed, that mayor has been removed. It will depend on how citizens portray Action SA. They might be seeing a party that has got a clear plan, that is able to implement its clear plans because they've done so. Others might also see them as a party that is disruptive, as a party that appears to be angry that they've been part of the Moonpeg shot. Now that they've been abandoned from there, they are ensuring that those who abandon them do not find peace.
Very interesting. Thank you so much for your insights this afternoon, Dr. Levi Ndoh, the political analyst, here with Week in Review here on the SABC News channel. And we'll see you right after this. Welcome back. Now we are going to tackle a critical issue affecting thousands of South African workers. The alarming trend of some companies failing to pay over money to retirement or pension funds after deducting it from employees' salaries. The recently introduced two-pot system has been marred by such cases of non-payment. Many workers are then left in financial limbo with their expectation of a secure retirement slipping away. The General Industries Workers Union of South Africa, GIWUSA, has sounded the alarm, condemning the two-pot system as a so-called neoliberal reform benefiting finance capital at workers' expense. Now, GIWUSA President Mametlwe Sebe joins us now to share his insights on this critical issue. Good afternoon, and thank you so much for being with us today.
It's a pleasure to be here, and greeting to all your viewers.
Can you give an overview of this two-pot system and its intended purpose?
Well, I mean, what it means is that where in the past, basically an employee who is having a retirement benefit in terms of the Provident Fund, for instance, would be able to access their Provident Fund upon losing of job, of a job or upon retirement. In terms of the system, few things have changed, and much more fundamental ones. One is that an employer every year, an employee every year, can access up to 30% of his savings, in what we call the savings pot, right? And then the other one is a vested pot, which basically can only be accessed upon retirement. And then what that means is that basically a worker who, regardless of whether they lose their job at the age of 40-something or 50-something, will not be able to access up to 70% of their savings in that in that pot, which basically is only for retirement. So you would have a worker who will be struggling for years without access to their savings, which they could use to set up business or to, create some meaningful employment for themselves to generate an income at the same time as they're receiving fulfillment from what form of employment they can be able to create from that. That's one aspect of it. And insofar as the 30%, I think people are not aware about the implications it has for taxation, that lots of it is going to be lost on tax, but also many of the workers are just going to be receiving, very dismal amount, which would make no difference, except to say that at the end of their retirement, they would have lost quite a substantial money in terms of saving. Now, we do have a problem, and the question is, what are those problems, but also in whose interest has this scheme been set up? Now, the workers did demand that they want to have access to their savings, and this is not what the workers actually wanted, right? What this system does, it is set in the interest of the finance capital. And what do we mean by that? It's about fund administrators, it's about investors, it's about insurance companies, banks, and all of that. Because with this new system now, it means they have a compulsory retirement benefits that are going to be tied up in the other pot, which can be accessible for a very long period and earning more stable interest than the current regime where workers, every time they lose their jobs, they can be able to access and withdraw those funds and so on. And you just have to listen to the CEO, of Alexander Forbes, which is one of the biggest fund managers in the country. He was over the moon, saying they're excited because for the first time, they would have a more stable access to these funds, which they are used to play in the financial markets. And in this case, they will, at the same time as the workers that are actually saving them will be most of the time unemployed and struggling with some funds to make any kind of meaningful income or anything like that.
Okay, let's talk about this retirement fund non-payments. How has GIWUSA been involved in addressing concerns surrounding that, retirement fund non-payments?
It is a massive problem. And I think it's only that now it has been exposed, right? By the fact that workers excited with an opportunity to access the 30%, this time around, they rushed to go and withdraw. And it turned out that thousands and thousands, of these employers are actually non-compliant, including many, particularly in the security, industry and all of that and so on. In fact, according to a pension fund adjudicator, up to 4,000 companies were non-compliant, but I think the statistics are probably much more than that. And it is said that, these non-compliant employers are holding up to 7 billion into in funds that have been deducted from salaries of the workers and are supposed to be deposited and collected on behalf of the provident funds and other retirement benefits funds, and this money are not paid out to those particular funds. So workers do discover this problem when they try to access the money upon retirement, or in this case now, when they are now entitled to withdrawing about 30%, but also families of the workers learn about this thing to their shock when employee has passed away, and whichever circumstances which make the payment of the provident fund due. That's when many workers are learning, and this is a problem that is chronic. There is just a flagrant violations of the law, but also it says something about the law itself. Because let's be clear about it. If a worker, say for a teller as an example, if a teller takes the money from the till in the retail shop and borrow himself, right, that will be treated as a theft. For that, an employer calls the police and they get the worker arrested over and above just being disciplined in terms of the internal procedures of the company. The question we need to be asking ourselves is, why is it that this textbook case of a theft where somebody misappropriate a funds they are collecting on behalf of an agent, they are acting as an agent in this case of the provident fund, in whose behalf they are collecting the money from the member of the fund being the worker, and they are not depositing accordingly. Why is it that the matter is not being treated as such? That is pure and simple theft for which there should be criminal prosecution.
Okay.
That's because the law is not about justice. The law is in the ultimate end, in the service of those that are owning the means of production and those that are privileged elite that rule society, and is about us and the poor. That is the only time where we see the law being applicable. Otherwise, we'll be having many of the CEOs of these companies in jail, which is where they belong for this flagrant misappropriation of workers' money.
Do you know what are the main reasons for the companies? Why are they failing to pay over the employees' retirement funds?
Let's call it what it is. Right? It's not a question of, when you take the money from me as an employee, as a member of the fund, which you have an agreement with, that will be collected, because when the employer collects this money, it's acting as an agent. I can't then come and say to you, which is what I think your question implies, right? That I can say, well, when I collected the money from you to the other person, I had financial problems, so I needed to solve my problem first. No, that is not your money. They are citing all sorts of reasons about company difficulties, the company was going through a difficult period, and so on and so on. That's a kind of, that's a kind of, the reports we are getting. But I can tell you this much. If I go to the same employer and say, well, as a teller, for instance, a worker in a retail shop, I've taken the money from the clients who bought your stock because I had financial problems in my family, and I've used this money for that. I'll pay you whenever I can. The employer will not only act in terms of disciplinary code, as I said, they will probably call the police. Now, the issue here is, this is not the money the employers are supposed to be using to resolving the problems in their companies. When the employer collects this money, he or she is acting purely as an agent of the provident fund, collecting the money from the member of the fund who is a worker. It must be paid accordingly. Anything else is theft, and we think and we agree must be prosecuted accordingly. But there's something also to be said about the conduct of provident fund administrators, because they are the ones that also have the responsibility to report this wrongdoing to a pension fund adjudicator, but also to, I think, the regulatory authority on financial services providers. But more than that, they have and they can lodge a criminal case. Because employer will not know. Employer will look at the receipt and say, my monthly payment statement reflects the deduction of the provident fund. It means that my fund is safe. It's only when they're retiring on the one access demand that they learn about that. Okay. And the provincial administrators have been doing nothing about those cases. And whenever they report them, it's always very late. And remember, after 3 years, that debt prescribed, meaning the employer or the adjudicator, even if they go to court, they can't recover the entire money. They can only recover the money that is owed for the period of 3 years. And that's how workers are losing billions and billions of rands from these unscrupulous employers, but also negligent provident fund administrators.
Okay, Mr. Sibaya, we have a caller on the line that wants to ask with a contribution or a question maybe to you. It's Noko from Limpopo. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for being with us on Week in Review.
Okay, thank you.
Do you have a comment or a question?
Okay, that's my question. I would like to know if I'm also qualified for two-pot pension fund regularity.
Is that your question? Whether you qualify for the two-pot?
You mean I may qualify or not?
Okay. Let's continue our conversation, Mr. Sibaya. You're still there. You're still with us this afternoon. The caller is just asking whether they qualify for the two-pot system. You understand how the two-pot system works, and it's about the third of the retirement funds.
Yes. I mean, it depends. If the employee, your caller in this case, has, a provident fund or whatever form of retirement benefit they are on, and, they do qualify for, actually, two-pot system is applicable to all the employees on retirement benefits. So everybody qualifies for it. I think the question probably he wants to ask is, does he qualify to access the 30% that is a portion of the provident fund or retirement benefit that is currently with the provident fund managers? Now, yes, he does that if he's obviously a member of the provident fund scheme, and that is up to 30% of his of his retirement savings at the moment, and every year he will be entitled to that.
Yes.
But obviously at the end of the retirement, and this is where another change is being introduced by the two-pot system, instead of getting a lump sum in terms of payment, is not going to get that. They are going to be forced to buy what we call annuity, which means basically they buy the annuity, and from that annuity they are going to be getting a money on monthly installments, right? Which will be a portion of what they were earning whilst they were still employed. Now, part of the problem with that, and I think this is a criticism that we say, this system is about the benefit of the finance monopoly capital that dominate the economy, and the government that is trying to cut the taxes on corporate profits. Because what they want to do with this is that they want to now offload the burden of retirement benefits entirely on the working class. Remember, not every worker is entitled to elderly pension. If you are singing and this annuity or monthly installment amount to over 7,200, regardless of how many dependents you have, you will no longer be entitled to a state elderly pension. And that's the reason we urge workers to be very cautious in accessing this, because this, I think, will have a long term repercussions for their ability to retire.
Mr. Sibaya, thank you so much for your contribution this afternoon, talking to us about the two-pot retirement system. Giwusa President Mametwe Sibaya. This is Week in Review on the SABC News Channel. We'll see you right after this.